to discuss it. With me around the table are two very active people in this field. They are Sister Iman Fahmy, who is an inclusive program designer with Pillar Nonprofit Organization. And when I asked her, what do you do there? She said, I am working on different projects, among them anti-racist, anti-oppression consultation. And also I have with me my brother, Nawaz Tahir, who is a lawyer by profession and who is the chair of Hikmah, which is an advocacy organization within the Muslim London community. So I welcome my partners around the table, Iman and Nawaz. And I would like to start by asking Iman to give us the opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I would like to take a moment to recognize the land and acknowledge the present truth of where I speak to you from today. I'm on the land of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Lenape people. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for centuries. They are the original caretakers and stewards of this land, and for that, I am deeply grateful. I would like to give thanks to Indigenous peoples who have come before me and present day, who have taught me so much about the responsibility we have to this land that we occupy. Learning and appreciating my personal responsibility to this land has been and continues to be a learning journey. I also know that the violence and oppression that Indigenous peoples endure on this land continues, and it's not just something of the past. I also recognize that I, the daughter of settlers to this land, benefits from the privileges as a settler. I benefit from the same systems that have oppressed and continue to oppress Indigenous communities. I am committed to prioritizing my learning and unlearning so that I can stand in solidarity with Indigenous sisters and brothers in both my professional and my personal life. I invite you all to pause and reflect upon your relationship with this land and what it means to your personal story, acknowledging that territorial acknowledgements are just one small part of dismantling colonial worldviews. Let's take a moment to reflect.
That couldn't have been said any better, Iman. Thank you so much for your remarks. I would like to mention that the choice of the date for this Zoom meeting was obvious for those who are following what is happening. That 29th of January, 4 years ago in 2017, was a night that shocked all of us, because a person entered the sanctity of a mosque in Quebec City, and we all heard 6 people were shot at point blank and 19 others were injured as a result. And since then, we've been advocating with the government and trying to spread awareness about the importance of doing something about Islamophobia, which led to that heinous crime that night. And I would like to start on a happy note, so to speak, and mention to those who did not hear yet that as a result of incessant advocacy by the National Council by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, NCCM, we were able to have the federal government recognize the 29th of January every year as a day of remembrance of what happened in Quebec City and a day of action against Islamophobia. And this is something that we have to be very proud of. We congratulate the NCCM for the work that they have done. Here locally in London, we have a Hikmah group, which is headed by its chair, Nawaz Tahir, who is with us around the table. And Hikmah has been instrumental locally as well as in advocating with NCCM to work at the grassroots as well as organizational level to do something about Islamophobia. And for those who are joining us at the Zoom or on Facebook, I would like to mention a definition of Islamophobia that I found in a book by Todd Green called The Fear of Islam. That's the title of the book. Islamophobia, he wrote, is the fear of and hostility towards Muslims and Islam that is rooted in racism and that results in individual and systemic discrimination, exclusion, and violence targeting Muslims and those perceived as Muslims. You know, with this definition that used the words discrimination, exclusion, I would like to now ask Iman, to elaborate on that, because as I mentioned early, that your title is inclusive, okay, rather than, when we talk about inclusion, inclusive program designer. So take us a little bit further into that work that you're doing.
Well, I want to note that the word inclusion in and of itself, I find a bit problematic in that what it is that it's implying that someone has the power to include. And we really have to look at whose power and whose voice are we centering when we talk about inclusion. We need to break beyond that and try to look at the power structures within which we operate. In terms of white supremacy, I feel is, as I mentioned earlier, as we were chatting, that white supremacy is the system within which we all exist. And it is within white supremacy are different manifestations of hate. So Islamophobia is one manifestation of hate. Anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Semitism. These are all manifestations of hate. They're all rooted in white supremacy. So the way I approach it is that I see that as Muslims, yes, Islamophobia is out there. We need to name it because we can't address it unless we've named it. But I feel that our problem is greater than just Islamophobia. It's the problem of white supremacy. And I feel that it's much like the parable that when you have, there's the parable of the parable of blind man and the elephant. And so it's like you'll have one man holding the trunk thinking it's a tree branch, and another man holding the tail thinking it's a rope, right? But because they don't see the entirety of the beast, right? They don't see the entirety of the beast to name it as an elephant. We are naming Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or anti-Black racism. The beast itself is white supremacy. And this is what I really would like to highlight in our conversation today, in that it's incumbent upon us to speak out against white supremacy in all its forms. We need to be speaking out against Islamophobia as it impacts us and that's its proximity, its most proximity to us is the most relatable, I guess you could say. But there are other forms of white supremacy, other manifestations, anti-Black racism. Are we speaking out against police brutality, for example? Are we speaking out against the water, the boil, excuse me, I just went blank, but the boil, the water, oh dear, with regards to indigenous communities, and how they have the boil, the water recommendations that they don't have clean water. Are we speaking out against the high incarceration rates of Black and Indigenous?
You're right, Iman, but because of time and because we want to focus on Islamophobia, if I may bring it back to this issue that we as Muslims within the larger Canadian London community, I would like to ask perhaps Nawaz, as chair of Hikmah, the advocacy group on behalf of Muslims, how are you seeing the progression of Islamophobia affecting the community? What are the manifestations of Islamophobia? Because we can see it in our Muslim women being attacked, and certainly, there are incidents that we are hearing about in different parts of Canada. We are seeing it in threatening statements sent to mosques all over the country. We are seeing it in murder committed, as in September at the Islamic Muslims organization in Mississauga, where a caretaker was murdered at the entrance to the mosque. So there are different manifestations of Islamophobia. Being at the helm, Nawaz, here in London, how do you see Islamophobia progressing?
Dr. Munir, thank you. That's a very good question. And there are a number of different manifestations of Islamophobia. One, as you've illustrated, are some of the obvious explicit manifestations of it, where there are physical acts, there are verbal acts that are being committed against Muslims, that are being committed against Muslim institutions. Then we have the verbal pieces. We saw, for example, recently, where Minister Omar Al-Gabra was appointed to be the Transport Minister of Canada. And that was a very happy moment for us. But then you have the Bloc Québécois leader trying to smear the minister with reference to his diversity and his background and being a Muslim. And so we have those pieces, but we also have the unconscious bias pieces as well that we have to examine. And when Sister Ayman talks about the narratives and looking at things globally, we have to address that piece as well. We have to get to the underlying cause of hate, and typically it's anger, it's division, and it's ignorance, this fear of something that is different. And so as an advocate, we have to make sure that we are addressing some of those issues, and also that we're not forgetting that while external advocacy is important, looking at ourselves internally is important, and making sure that we're setting up the internal structures to make sure that we're looking after each other, so that we make sure that that people in our community know that if they are the victims of an Islamophobic act, they're not alone, it's not their fault, and that there is proper support for us.
That's perfectly correct. But I would like to ask either Iman or Nawaz, either one of you can really jump at this observation. I read that in 2017, there was something called the industry of Islamophobia. I, couldn't believe my eyes when I read that. But $39 million were put forward to work on this industry and try to achieve many objectives, among which is to portray Islam as a monolithic way of life, meaning that if we see ISIS, for example, or those killer organizations that were created as part of this attempt to make Islam look that, see what Muslims do. So to make Islam look monolithic, to make Muslims look as the enemy, to make Muslims look as the separate entity. So there is a concerted effort to propagate Islamophobia. So, Iman, do you see this? Have you read anything similar about such objectives? And that alarms me because, when you have a concerted effort, well planned to achieve a certain objective, then unless we do something meaningful to break that chain, then the end result is really scary. What do you think, Iman?
Yeah, sure. That's the way I see it. Again, I feel that it is this industry is a subset of this far right media that has really thrived recently. I mean, the far right media has been poisoning minds online, especially in a way that we've never seen in the past, because historically this is a platform, a medium that we've never had access to in the past. But it's really through its far-reaching tentacles, it's reached folks and poisoned minds, and it's this white supremacy that is a threat, and it has infiltrated in so many institutions this way of thinking. And this is why I take the position that we need to fight not just the industry of Islamophobia, but I take the position of fighting the industry of like white supremacy. That say, for example, white supremacy media. We know that the shooter who went to Quebec, he was consuming a diet of the far right media, and this is what he was consuming and was really just obsessed with, to a degree that he went and he felt that his family and his livelihood and his just way of life was threatened. And when you had the Trump Muslim ban, and then Trudeau is welcoming newcomers into Canada, and because of the poisoning of his mind, this is the outcome. So this media exists, and this industry exists. The Islamophobia is a subset.
So Iman, you mentioned Trump by accident. I want to ask Nawaz. Nawaz, do you feel that now, with the Trump era behind us, that there is a chance that white supremacy that was mentioned by Sister Iman would be, diluted a little bit, and that we will have a better chance at dealing with xenophobia in general and Islamophobia in particular?
Yes, I mean, the short answer is yes. And let me give you the example of many industries, many companies, many organizations that have very robust, very strong reputations of having an inclusive and diverse workforce, a culture where differences are embraced. And that typically happens because you have leaders or champions that advocate for that. And so we know we have examples from them of how leadership is so critical in that domain, how having champions of acceptance is so critical. And so when you see a leader leaving, that is the exact opposite of that, that encourages, empowers, hate, leave, that element of empowerment is taken away. And it's why it's extremely important for us on the advocacy side of things to make sure that we call out that kind of political rhetoric when it happens, and that we hold accountable politicians who try to use the us versus them notion of trying to create support for what you may deem to be your core base. And it's for all of us to do that, and to send a message to politicians who try to do that, that if that's your way of getting support, if you think that's your way of getting elected, maybe you shouldn't be in politics. Maybe you shouldn't be seeking to be a leader, because that's a very short-sighted approach to leadership. It's a very short-sighted approach to becoming an elected leader of a country or a political party or that type of thing. And we've now learned firsthand that if you don't deal with that head on, you're going to have a person, for example, waving and walking through the heart of your democracy with a Confederate flag.
I would actually, yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Iman.
Could I, yeah.
Please.
My concern is that with Trump out of office, folks are going to get complacent. And we have to remember that over 70 million people voted for him, right? So just because he's not in office, it doesn't mean that that mindset no longer exists. I mean, we really are lucky that he was able to get, he was lost the election, basically. It was not a resounding win for Biden by any means. And this is something we need to remember and not to get complacent about, that mindset, that Trumpism, that populism still exists. And Trumpism, because he was successful, because there was a void that he stepped into, and he was able to capitalize upon that. And so there's going to be another Trump, and another Trump, and another Trump. And I think we, all of us, whether Canada, United States, but we need to be prepared for when that happens, because the next Trump that comes might be more intelligent and might be able to manipulate at a better, with better skill and more finesse. And that's a dangerous thought.
Yeah, your argument is valid, Iman, and that brings us to maybe recognize that there are two forms of Islamophobia. There is the organizational Islamophobia, and here we may mention that in Canada there are more than 300 groups that are under that category, holding the flag of Islam in Canada. And there is individual Islamophobia that runs rampant as a result of the media, as a result of political pressures, as a result of problems happening all over the world, and people are not educated about Islam. So people just see those images and they translate them into fear. And if I may here, I actually, in preparation for this meeting, I looked at polls that were conducted in Canada from 2009 until 2018. And without mentioning numbers, I would like to mention some of the results of those polls so that we can see the different elements that keep igniting Islamophobia. Look at this. It says here, one of the polls, Muslims can only be trusted a little or not at all. Another conclusion, discrimination against Muslims is mainly their fault. Interesting. Canadians would be bothered if they received services from someone wearing the headscarf. Most Canadians don't have a positive impression of Islam. Again, I'm reminding that these are conclusions of polls conducted in Canada from 2009 to 2018. Mainstream Islamic teachings promote violence. Muslim immigrants have fundamentally different values than ours. Then more than half of Canadians support government, and this is scary, support government surveillance of mosques. Can you imagine? More than, here I remember the number, 51% said that we should ask governments to have surveillance of mosques. And, you know, this is scary, but these are the elements of Islamophobia that we are dealing with. And another thing that really is bothersome is that the media are using now Muslim voices of people who are good writers, but they are insecure in the way they look at their Islam, and they are writing articles in mainstream papers about certain Islamic features, certain Islamic things, and by twisting facts, we are igniting Islamophobia further and further and further. Do you agree with that, Nawaz?
I do agree with that. I think it's a very important point, and it's part of why advocacy is important, because if we recall, one of my earlier comments was one of the root causes of Islamophobia is this notion of ignorance. It's this fear of something that is different, this fear of something that is unknown. And to a certain extent, we've fallen into that trap of allowing others to define Islam and the key characteristics of Islam. And you know, one example of that is, you know, we can do more, and we are doing a lot in respect to some of the key tenets of Islam to look after the poor, look after the elderly, look after those people that are in need. And these are key tenets of our beliefs. Yet what is being reported are more political pieces of Islam, some of them more, and then some things that are not true about
Yeah.
Islam as
Sorry,
well.
not meaning to interrupt, but you mentioned these things, and I don't want to forget that, for example, for about a year now, the Muslim soup kitchen has been operating out of Al Hayat Mosque, and the kind of response we are seeing from the neighbors, from the people who are benefiting every Saturday from those services. And not only that, we are finding people who are not from the Muslim community, but they come and they establish friendships, you know, especially in this difficult time dealing with the COVID pandemic. So these programs are not finding their way sufficiently to the media to be shown that Muslims are part of this community at large.
You're 100% correct, and it goes to this issue of letting people elaborate on or take the stage on what divides us, as opposed to so many things that unite us, and that the soup kitchen is a great example of that, of how we are doing what our religion calls us to do, to look after people that are in need. And on a global level, on a higher level, we are letting other people that might be proficient in writing, in having access to the media, define what Islam is and what it means to be a Muslim, which is often not true, and in many occasions is the complete opposite of what it is to be a Muslim.
Yeah, I would like to add, and a couple of points came to mind. I feel that we do need to take ownership of our story and own our stories and tell our stories, because no one else will tell it the way we want them to be told. So we need to invest in these sorts of opportunities for young folks to really hone their skills, whether it's in journalism or other forms of media and storytelling. And I find that one of the problems we have as a community is that there are a lot of professions that we don't value, where we really should value, in terms of, say, the liberal arts or the arts in general, that would really promote this sort of storytelling component, when we have a tendency within our communities to favor, whether it's engineers or doctors or lawyers. I mean, there's certain professions that we tend to favor and tend to encourage our children to go into, and other professions that we don't. So we should encourage our children, especially those who are talented in the arts, to pursue the arts, because the arts is that storytelling where you're able to connect with folks no matter what your background. I mean, it's a universal language, is the arts. And I feel that it should be incumbent upon us to promote that within our communities and in the next generation, so we can tell our own stories. I think that is really important. Another thing that I wanted to say is that, I mean, the soup kitchen is phenomenal, and I've heard wonderful things about it, but I personally feel uncomfortable, and not that anyone is saying this in the discussion here, but I'm saying that I feel uncomfortable doing these sorts of things and then going to say, look at here, we're doing this, we're good people, please accept us, right? So that makes me uncomfortable, and I feel that I really wouldn't want to position it, and I wouldn't want anyone to misunderstand that we're positioning it that way.
I'm glad you mentioned that, but it is meant just to show examples of inclusiveness. You know, this is what I meant when I said that these are such examples that are not meant, you know, when they were started to be to advertise for the Muslim community, or to say, look who we are. No, but the question is, why do people look in a different direction than they are supposed to, when these things say a lot about who the Muslims are? Now, one thing I would like, because time is not in our favor, perhaps Iman, if you would like to take that, you know, there is Islamophobia within the school system. You know, I know many examples of parents coming to me, telling me about certain stories that their children are experiencing. And now, how do you suggest we handle Islamophobia in the school system? Because certainly, you know, children are very vulnerable, and when they feel that they are isolated from the rest, it grows with them, and it becomes difficult to reverse. So we would like to handle this right at the base.
Yeah, absolutely. I really am a big proponent of engagement and communication between parent and school, and right from the get-go, so that it really is important to establish that relationship and those clear channels of communication, and not wait for any issues to come up, but to have that as a basis. And one thing that I do know that that the teachers in the school system are looking to learn and looking to engage parents, and so it's a two-way relationship. The parents would have to engage and really show their values, show their culture, and be really unapologetic in terms of owning who they are and what we stand for as a community and in terms of our beliefs. And then it's with the teacher and the parent, you're able to find an understanding ideally. Of course, that doesn't happen all the time. And there are processes by which to go through in the school system. So you would first go through the teacher and then the principal and superintendent. So there are processes, but I believe that the foundation is a good relationship right from the start.
Thank you for mentioning this. So from education and Islamophobia in that realm, I would like to go to Nawaz and again talk politics. Nawaz, we are unique in London in that we have politicians who almost, I would say, who are part of our family. And the least I can say that, I can see on the screen that two of them, one from the federal level, Peter Fragiskatos, and one from the provincial level, Teresa Armstrong, are joining. And the very fact that they are joining in this discussion shows, and this is not the only time, I mean, we've seen them in different places for different programs. So what is Hikma doing to advocate with those very understanding, very caring politicians who take their commitment very seriously? Because I see it that when we advocate at the political level, we will be able to affect a change, because they are the people who will go to the parliament and to the legislature and will speak on our behalf. So what is Hikma doing at that level, Nawaz?
Sure. Let me, if I could, Dr. Munir, just say one thing about the education piece as well, because Sister Iman talked about the arts and other industries that typically we haven't gotten involved in. And the way to tie that all back together is to look at who's writing the textbooks and the curriculum that are the curricula that are being taught in our schools. And when you have a set of teaching principles that is based on one ethnicity, then you lose other pieces. And in Islam, we have a great history of contributions to math, to science, even to things like to architecture, philosophy. And we need to celebrate that. We need to be proud of that. But we also need to make sure that those are the kinds of things that are being taught in schools, so that when we look at modern medicine, and we talk about, and I use medicine as one example, we can see the evolution and how different cultures contributed to the modern body of knowledge that we have right now. So I just wanted to mention that on the education piece, that curriculum development and the acknowledgement of the contributions of other races, religions, ethnicities to our modern body of knowledge is really important. On the political piece, and I touched on this earlier.
Before you get to, you mentioned an excellent point, but just talking about it is not enough, in my opinion. How do you suggest we become participants in developing curricula that reflect those concerns you just mentioned? How do we do that?
I mean, there's really two ways. One, as Sister Iman said, we have to broaden our own community minds about what industries our children get into in terms of jobs, in terms of careers, and we need to think broadly on that. We also know that from federal government, provincial government, municipal government, there is always a need to sit on different committees, different advisory panels, and
that's
so
what I was getting at. So to have members of our community go forward and participate, just standing away and just express concern is not enough. We've
Right.
got to go forward.
And we're not suggesting that we have to have Muslims run for mayor or run for MPP or run for member of parliament. Those are very important, but there are also a lot of non-public office jobs, the machinery of government that we can get involved in. And people often talk about decision making. And Sister Iman talked at the very beginning about this idea of who's including who, and where does that power rest. If we talk about our community sitting at that table, making those decisions, then we're talking about true engagement, true diversity, true involvement. So those are important steps that we need to think about. On the
Could I
political
just,
issue.
sorry, if you don't mind me just interrupting just one
No
point
problem.
regarding the curriculum. I think that's a really important point. And I do think that it's part of, again, I feel like I'm a broken record, but I will just say it again, part of like decolonizing education, so that it's not just Eurocentric curriculum that our children are being taught, but it's a curriculum that's reflective of Islamic history, the great African civilizations that we never hear about, Chinese civilizations, that there are so many civilizations that are just totally, that the erasure of these civilizations, except for the European or any Eurocentric civilizations or Eurocentric curriculum, is what is being highlighted in the schools. And this is something that we need to disrupt in a positive way. I'm not saying with any form of agitation, but we need to point out that these sorts of curricula are no longer acceptable, and that they are not reflective of our society. And so this sort of conversation is built on relationships. And that's why I was saying relationships between the parents and the school are critical, because as you have that good foundation of a relationship, then you can approach the school in conversations about what is being taught in the classroom and how can it best be reflective of everyone and not just a certain demographic.
So again, both you and Nawaz are pointing in the same direction, that we really need to be involved in the decision making. Okay, politics, Nawaz. I see Lindsay now has joined us. Welcome. Oh, and Terence as well. And so that's wonderful. That is wonderful, because before you joined in, I was saying that, we are fortunate in London that our politicians are part of our family. So when we have concerns, we feel that we can communicate those very freely, and we welcome you joining us today in this very important discussion. And I just started asking Nawaz to tell us what is Hikmah, which is the advocacy group of our Muslim community, doing in communicating our concerns with our politicians. Nawaz?
Thank you, Dr. Munir. So communication and keeping open communication is very important, and it's something that historically our Ummah has not been very good at. And so what we are trying to do with Hikmah is trying to stay in constant communication with our elected officials. And I have to say, both at a local level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level, it's I don't want to use the word easy to make it sound wrong, but it's as easy as it's ever been, because we have good people that are in place right now. And it hasn't always been easy, but we have very good relationships with elected officials, and you can see that here today. The advocacy piece, though, is very important. And Dr. Mir, you talked at the outset about tomorrow finally being recognized as a day of remembrance, and that's a very, very important step. But it's a step that was born out of 75 Muslim organizations across Canada coming together with a common purpose common messaging and a local grassroots effort to make sure that across Canada, all of those organizations reached out to their members of parliament. And that is the important piece. It's having a clear message, having a consistent message, and having a lot of people deliver that message. And those three components are critical to developing political advocacy. And so that when I go and I speak to Lindsay, or I go and speak to Peter, or Teresa, or Terrence, that they understand that our community is engaged and is going to write about things that are passionate, and that they will hear the numbers of people of the Muslim community saying this is important to us. So that participation is really important. And sometimes it's as simple as sending an email to your local member of parliament, whether it's federal or provincial or local. And so, not everybody has to be out there, promoting it in the newspaper or on the sidewalk, going door to door, that type of thing. It's important to understand that different people can play different roles, and there are different components to advocacy, and all of us can do something. And all of us have our special characteristics and special offerings and strengths that we bring to the table. And so we have people that can act as coordinators. We have people that can do the organizing and the mobilization. But all of that is empty if we don't have the grassroots behind us. And that is critically important in our advocacy work.
If I could just add,
Go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, if I could just add that the organizations that made this possible, it was broader than 75 Muslim organizations. It was really over 200 organizations, whether it's faith-based or secular. So it really was a cross-section of Canadian society. It was wonderful to see 75 Muslim organizations come together. But I think for me, as a member of the Muslim community, it was even more impactful to know that this was the result, the culmination of collaborative work over the past 4 years of a number of organizations across sectors at the grassroots level. And I wanted to point that out.
Very heartwarming. That's excellent to mention. And I mean, I cannot let this opportunity go without at least giving 1 minute to each of our politicians, because we would like to feel the inclusivity of our family when discussing such an important issue like Islamophobia. But I would like to mention, before maybe they can address it in 1 minute for each one of them, that I received through email as I'm, trying to discuss this roundtable, questions that are almost identical but with different wording, and that is related to youth and the children. And to me, as an older leader within the community, it doesn't make me feel that comfortable. And that is, questions and comments to the effect that many young people, many children are reluctant to join in Islamic activities at places of worship or at Islamic conventions or conferences out of fear to be stigmatized by their friends. Even some of them are resorting to changing their names at school. Some of them are resorting to change the way they look. And especially, I'm hearing in some of the questions and in my observations that there are Muslim girls who are removing their traditional Islamic headdress so that they will not be identified as Muslim. And that is, again, happening at an age group that is very vulnerable, and we really need to to handle this. So I would like to ask maybe Teresa to be the first one to speak to us for 1 minute, please, about this issue that's concerning everybody, not only Muslim. And this is one thing I want to say, that people think that Islamophobia is an Islamic problem. As Iman mentioned at the outset, that this is more than a Muslim community problem. This is xenophobia. This is white supremacy that is cutting at the heart of our society as Londoners, as Canadians. So Teresa, if you can, speak to us for 1 minute, please. I'm timing you. Can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. And apologies for the I'm going to try to respect that 1 minute time as well. I want to thank you for having this conversation, because I feel like we're not connected physically anymore, person to person, that this needs to happen more often, and we have a bigger forum to include more people in. So it's a very important topic. It's always been something that should be on the forefront, and for better or for worse, what happened in the States has brought this to the surface so that we can have these real discussions and look to changes that are happening. And I know in Parliament just now, there was that motion passed about the Proud Boys, acknowledging that they are, and that is a good step, right? And we need to call those things out and make it known that when we see it, we call it. The Hikma, I am happy to meet with Hikma to see what kind of next steps forward, as well as you mentioned being part of the conversation. And it's incumbent on us as leaders to include you in those consultations and talk when there are bills coming up, to reach out to you so that you can give us feedback before those things are written. And if they are written, what you can see, the pitfalls or the good things about them. So I'm always committed to the Muslim community. And I was very endearing for you to say that you are like part of our extended family, because when I became elected, it was such a welcoming feeling to be part of all your traditions and your cultural and just your extended family. So I want to continue that, and I want to hear about what actions, what kind of things we want to do provincially if it comes to an education piece, how we can engage you and look for those things, because it's not acceptable in a world that we live today that people live in fear and discrimination and racism because of their religion or their cultural traditional wear that they have. It's not acceptable. So I'll leave it at that, but I'm glad to be here tonight.
Thank you. Peter?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, everyone, for inviting me, first of all, tonight. Nice to see you all, and I apologize. I know that the meeting started earlier, but I had a committee meeting that went until about 8:30 or so. In any case, I hope everyone's keeping healthy and safe, and as well as can be expected during a very hard time right now. On the question that you've raised, Dr. Munir, there's no simple answers here. I think that I would begin by picking up where Nawaz was leaving off in terms of the level of activism that led to what we're seeing tomorrow. Yes, the federal government is moving ahead and recognizing a National Day of Remembrance, but that is the result of a lot of hard work, concerted hard work by civil society organizations. I really appreciate the work that those on the call who did take part in that. Really appreciate that work, and that kind of activism will have to continue. Sometimes activism leads to people running for political office. Other times, and it was mentioned earlier, it's a very apt point that engaging in society, making a contribution, fighting for change, that can happen, in so many different ways. Being active in one's society, in one's community, that takes many different forms. Parent-teacher associations, if we want to see change within schools. You talk about how young people are being treated, Dr. Munir. That's absolutely critical. reaching out to other organizations and being involved. There's many examples I could give, and I know I'm on a 1 minute time limit here, so I won't break that. But I'll leave you with a couple last thoughts on this, and that is as far as seeing change, we have a lot left to do. We have come very, very far as Canadians, but there is much left to do. We still have problems of integration. We still have a situation where young people, in particular Muslim youth, as you were saying, Dr. Munir, they don't feel, quite often they do not feel a part of the wider social fabric. And that is a question for all of us to wrestle with, all of us who are engaged as elected officials and beyond. I think it requires change in terms of the society. If we think about, I'll be honest with you, my first encounter with a Muslim was not one that was personal in any way. It was, seeing images of an Indiana Jones film and images through things like Aladdin, and those are not flattering images. They leave certain perceptions, and we have to unlearn what we have learned. If you know what I'm saying, we have to really come to terms with the fact that these perceptions that exist remain with us. They shape our understanding of the world, and especially if youth who know nothing of Islam see those images, they're going to form certain opinions. So that requires us to then move in the realm of policy. Education curriculums have to be reflective, more reflective, as Iman was saying. And also, let's think about social media too. I'm glad the federal government is moving ahead with efforts to curb hate speech online. And we live in 2021. This means social media platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, Instagram have a real responsibility to curb hate speech altogether. And you'll see the federal government moving in that direction. I'm not going to turn this discussion into politics, or to the political rather, but I think it's important to leave it on that note, to provide some assurance that we are, as elected officials, looking at all these things. But please stay active. To everyone on the call and beyond, stay active. I feel good about a lot of things that are happening, going in the right direction, but there's a lot left to do.
Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, Lindsay.
Thank you so much. And I actually, the reason I was late too, I also had a committee like Peter. And so I'm so grateful to be able to join you even for the last bit, but to build on that relationship is so key. And I think it was interesting, the committee that I was in was Indigenous Affairs, and they were talking about some changes in some legislation about reconciliation and about education and what that means. And really using the power of education at all levels in all sectors to better understand each other. And I think I agree with you absolutely that in London we try really hard to, and I know that you as leaders try so hard to be inclusive and to constantly talk about the true meaning of Islam and peace and that sharing and giving, and that is always so incredible to me. I think that that's one of the points in terms of federal support. It's about being consistent. It's about always being there, not when it's just it looks good or it's convenient. It's about the consistency of that relationship and the strength of that relationship, but to standing up when you need us to. And so I as Teresa mentioned, and I'm so grateful that we were able to bring forward the motion on against Proud Boys, and to speak up against some leaders who will try and divide. So with that, with different acts in terms of anti-racism acts and support for mosques or other places of worship where we can ensure that there is extra security in terms of that money into education, that piece, employment equity and what that means, and changing how we see every aspect of our lives. I think it absolutely does take a long time, unfortunately, but that I'm certainly committed to it. I know you are absolutely committed to it, and that with that strength of that partnership, with that relationship, that we will hopefully overcome those negative forces, because as one of my heroes always said, love is better than anger, and hope and optimism is always key. So thank you so
That's
much.
very articulate, very wonderful. Terence, we would like to hear from you as well.
Okay, I'll try to keep my time. I don't have a clock on the wall to watch, but thank
I
you very much.
remind.
Thank you all for having me here this evening. It comes back to a very fundamental principle that everyone should be proud of who they are. And it's shocking to hear and to think that somebody is afraid of being their true authentic self. Hate is not an Islamic problem. It is everyone's problem. I come back to the poem by Martin Niemöller, First They Came. And it was written during the Second World War, and it goes through a bunch of different groups. And eventually the speaker of the poem says, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. All hate is linked. It does not discriminate. It chooses groups. And quite frankly, it's something that we must all call out and do something about. I think curricular change is a phenomenal idea. We see far too often within our culture that there is cultural sensitivity training, as though you can receive some sort of diploma or a certificate and you've arrived. It's an ongoing process. It's something we all must constantly be evolving and changing and shifting. I think back to grade 3 when I met my first Muslim friend. And at that time, there was no such thing as Islamophobia, nor should there be, but we've seen such a dramatic shift. People like Charles McVitie, who unfortunately has been given far too big a podium, one of the most noted Islamophobes in our country. And that's something that we all have a responsibility to call out. And, I must say, I've always had such a warm welcome from the Muslim community. Every time I visit, people are so wonderful, so open, and so caring. And it's something that we all need. We need a greater sense of community. And please know that we are all proud to stand and support you. Teresa was the champion and brought Islamic Heritage Month for her private members legislation. Peggy brought Lebanese Heritage Month. And I had been working on, but a different MPP got it, which was the Day of Remembrance and Action on Islamophobia in Ontario's legislature. The member from Beaches East York, Rima Burns-McGowan, and it's something that the NDP absolutely supports. So thank you.
Terence, thank you so much. And I will take that commitment to change certain elements of the curriculum. So you will hear probably from Iman and Nawaz in the future. They will work with you, and hopefully we can translate our discussions into real action. But before you go from the screen, I want to compliment you on your background. Certainly beautiful works of art, and it looks beautiful. Okay, now the thing that I would like to mention, and I'm sure everybody agrees with me, that this 1 hour was totally not sufficient to really discuss the issue. We just scratched the surface, and I'm going to request from the organizers if we can have a part 2 to this discussion in the near future. But before we go, I would like to ask my partners around this table, Iman and Nawaz, to have their concluding thoughts, probably in about a minute and a half maximum. So I'll start with Iman.
Sure. Okay. So you may have noticed that I'm wearing a green felt square this evening. So the Green Square campaign was launched by NCCM to mark January 29th, the worst mass shooting in Canada in 25 years. As we know, the shooter killed 6 worshippers, left 6 widows and 17 orphans. So that day has been forever etched in my mind. And I'll always remember where I was when I heard the news. After that day, going to the mosque, I would often think of how I might escape if we were attacked. Green is the color of the carpet in Quebec City. It is also the carpet of life, of peace, of harmony. Green is the color of hope. So by wearing a green square, I am hoping that this never happens again. But for that to be true, we must all make a commitment. We must all make a commitment to stand against hate. It's not enough to be a good person. It's not enough to be not to be racist. We must be anti-racist. It's not enough not to hate. We must be anti-hate. We need to normalize difficult conversations, difficult, uncomfortable conversations, and not shy away from them. We need to pause and reflect upon our privileges. Those of us with the greatest power and privilege have the responsibility to take the greatest risk, because our power and our privilege shelters us from the fallout. And remember that we have different powers and privileges in different spaces. So I'm asking that we all take time to reflect on our privileges and how we leverage them. It's white supremacy that we need to address. It's white supremacy that perpetuates anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism. So I'm asking, are we speaking out against other forms of oppression? And I'm asking for us to inwardly reflect, how are we perpetuating oppressive structures? So we're not going to be successful in fighting the root cause of Islamophobia if we look at it in isolation and not part of a greater system of oppression. All oppression is linked, and it is all rooted in white supremacy. So whether it's anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any other form of hate, we must take a stand and speak out, because words have consequences, hate has consequences, and in Quebec, those consequences were deadly. Thank you.
Iman, I now see the wisdom that the organizers had in asking you to be part of this panel, of this roundtable discussion, because throughout this discussion, you articulated the issue extremely well. You brought up many very important points that we really need to build on. We didn't only listen to you, but we want to ask for your commitment to lead us in translating your thoughts in cooperation with others who will work with you to see that Islamophobia will be short-lived. Now I will turn to Nawaz to hear his concluding remarks, please. And by the way, you know, Nawaz heading Hikmah, for those who don't know, Hikmah means wisdom. And for the person who's leading wisdom, he must be the wisest in the group. So, Nawaz.
Thank you, Dr. Munir. And actually, it's ironic, and the circle is somewhat complete, because the name Hikmah was chosen by the board of directors that are part of Hikmah based on a sermon that you gave about wisdom. And we heard that word Hikmah, and we ran with it. So it's ironic that you say that now. So thank you for the inspiration for Hikmah, and for your words, your leadership, your interfaith dialogue. This is born out of what happened that we're talking about in terms of an anniversary tomorrow. And it's important for us to remember that it wasn't 6 lives were lost. It's that 6 families were fundamentally affected for the rest of their lives. It's about Ayman Derbali, who will never walk again because he was shot 6 times. It's about the 19 others that were injured physically, but many more for whom the psychological injuries are just as real, and we can never forget about that. And in terms of translating that into action, I'm reminded about the words of Martin Luther King Jr. And he talked about darkness. And he said that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. And that hate cannot drive out hate, only love can. And so when we talk about what needs to be done, and we've heard it said today that there is difficult work to be done, it's by shining a light. It's through acts of love. And that involves unity, it involves education. And there is a lot of work to be done. And I was very impressed when the leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, brought the motion to have the Proud Boys declared as a terrorist organization, and it passed unanimously without any political gamesmanship, without any political jockeying, unanimously passed. And that was an important step, because there's a lot of work to do to dismantle hate, to dismantle the vehicles that are used for hate, and to dismantle that infrastructure. And we have to do that both internally through a united front, where we're all advocating, as I said, with a common message, common delivery, unity, and a grassroots movement, but also with leadership. And leadership is important from our elected officials, and we need to support them and encourage them, but be advocates and walk with them and demand that level of principled advocacy that is necessary to dismantle those foundations of hate. And so with that, I thank those elected officials that are with us today. I thank all of you for joining us and watching us today. And I want to make sure that two key messages are received today. One, that if you are a victim of Islamophobia, you are not alone. Please reach out. There are a number of organizations, MRC, the mosque, different institutions to help out with that. You are not alone. You should report it, and you have the reassurance that as community leaders, we will do whatever we can to support you. And the second message is that every one of us that's here today has a role. And you may think maybe my background isn't in public speaking, it's not in articulating thoughts. It doesn't matter. All of us have a special gift. We may not have discovered it yet, but all of you have a role to play in helping us along this battle. And thank you for joining us tonight.
With this very humble statement from you, Nawaz, I tell you that, you know, had we not discovered your ability to express our concerns in public, we wouldn't have asked you to represent us, you know, on the media. I want to thank you, and tonight I feel very proud, I feel hopeful that leadership in the Muslim community has been invested with young people who will take us further into the 21st century. And, you know, as I said before, you know, during my lifetime, I am certain, God willing, that Islamophobia will be part of history. I would like to thank, on behalf of all of those who participated in tonight's meeting, the London Muslim Mosque, the Islamic Center, Islamica, and the Muslim Association of Canada, and all others for organizing such a meeting. And as I said, I hope that it will be part one to a series that will discuss this important issue and will translate it into action. Once again, thank you. May the Almighty God be with you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.